To the presence and to the Spirit of God, to those that assemble to us on holy soil, we greet you. Good morning. Let us thank our choir and Sister Ruby for leading us in the ministry of worship this morning in the most excellent way. And certainly we applaud and thank all of you who have represented today in your black college or university paraphernalia and your black Greek attire as we remember the struggle but also the meaning of black higher education. And so we thank God for those who bled and suffered so that we might be today standing strong in the power of God. It is in 2 Timothy chapter 1 that we find our text. As always, we recognize the presence of my beloved wife, baby girl, and also we recognize the presence of my in-laws this morning, Stanley and Carolyn Benjamin. Amen. 2 Timothy chapter number 1. And beginning our reading for the sake of perusal in this pericope, beginning this reading in verse number 4 as we stand, as we read, reverence the reading of the Holy Writ. 2 Timothy chapter number 1. Beginning our reading at verse number 4. As I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and now I'm sure dwells in you as well. For this reason, I remind you to anazopurio, stir up or fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and of love and self-control. You may be seated in the presence of God. And verse number 6, for this reason I remind you, stir anazopurio, to fan into flame, or to make open and free as a flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. I want, for the sake of our perusal of this pericope, I want to talk from the subject, don't be scared. Don't be scared. One of my great mentors, Dr. Cheryl Ann Kirk Dugan, often reminded me of the power of fear if we fuel it. But she also reminded me something, that fear has a sense of definition, and that is false evidence appearing as real. That it has no more power than what we give it, because its reality is only based upon our sense of giving it reality. Whatever we have, we give it, whatever place we position it in our lives. But fear is a controlling and mean and evil demon. Fear is that thing that can make the strongest of men or women, the strongest of them, feel weak, feel as if they are lacking, feel as though they don't have any security, feel as if they have no purpose. Fear can take a person who is educated and who has done great things in their lives and has made many achievements and feel as though after all of that, that they've done nothing and that they can do nothing and that they have to be defined by certain things and they have to be controlled by certain demons. Fear is that thing that makes us lose truly a sense of our reality. It'll make us be controlled by things that don't even exist. It'll make us abide by things that have no purpose. It will make us say things that need not be said. It will make us not say things when we need to say certain things. Fear is an evil demon and devil. Fear will also distort the person that God has created us to be. It will prevent us from seeing the fullness of God's grandeur, from seeing the splendor that God has placed in us and around us. It will cause us to question, does God even know what God is doing in our lives? Fear is a strong and evil demon. Fear will cause us to begin to not take advantage of all of the opportunities that God has not only placed in front of us, but all of the opportunities that God has placed within us. Fear is an evil and controlling demon. Fear will cause us to look in the mirror and not see what I tell you all the time that we must see staring back at us, and that is God. Fear will make us believe that the hands that God has given us, that the gifts that God has given us are mediocre at best. They cannot be a full benefit to us, and certainly they can be of no benefit to anyone else. Fear is an evil and controlling demon. That became the demon that often has controlled God's best servants down through history. Fear. It was fear that even when Jesus, after being determined, being led, being motivated, being ordained by his daddy, and being led into the wilderness, it was fear that the enemy tried to utilize to cause even Jesus to question his mission, his purpose, his power, and his anointing. Fear. Fear can cause someone to think that God has led you into a place with no purpose, with no potential, and without divine hands. That's what fear can do. Fear has been that perverted spirit that would cause Paul to question his calling. It would cause even this young man by the name of Timothy, setting up shop as a young giant of a preacher in a place called Ephesus. And Paul comes, having had much struggle, having endured much issue, having had much many blockades placed in front of him. It is now Paul, in his own affliction, that writes to this young preacher, wanting to remind him to not allow fear to be that demon that keeps him from seeing all of the fullness that God has placed in him and the opportunities before him, not only to impact his own life, but to impact the lives of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And so Paul writes, out of his own misery, out of his own hurt, out of his own brokenness, out of his own poverty, out of his own darkness, he writes to this young man by the name of Timothy, because he remembers Timothy, because Timothy has also been good to Paul in his own personal struggles. And Paul remembers that I saw something in this boy. I saw the hand of God in him. I saw a spirit down inside of him. And I read upon the agenda of his life, and I saw that God had something great in him and for him. And God had a people that needed to hear what he had to say. And he said that I don't want him to have to fall into some of the very pitfalls that I've fallen in. I don't want him to have to be shaken and rocked by some of the things that have broken me down through the years. So he said, I'm going to write to him, and I'm going to thank him for his goodness to me. But I'm hoping that I can give him some direction, and I'm hoping that I can give him some encouragement so that as I encourage him, he might encourage somebody else. And he said, I want to tell him something. And when he opens up this letter, he says that I remember your spirit. I remember the power and the glory and the anointing that was over your life. And he writes to him not only to encourage him, but in his encouragement of Timothy, he wants to remind him, don't you ever deny the gifts, the power, and the agenda that God has set in front of you and for you, just simply based upon the fact that there's going to be some things that will often try to scare you from your agenda. That's life. There's always going to be something that tries to cause us and call us to cause us and to call us to cause us and to call us not to do what God has purpose for us to do. Why? Because it's not just simply me or about you. Because if it calls me and causes me not to meet the agenda that God has set for my life, that means that there's somebody else that is going to miss out on the power, on the handiwork, and on the abundance and the blessing that God desires to share with them. And so what God does is when God establishes purpose and establishes this power, not only does God establish something, there's always an adversary that's there to establish something as well. I always tell you, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it a demon. You can call it a devil. You can call it Beelzebub. You can call it just an enemy. It does not matter. There's always an adversary. And what the adversary often attempts to do is scare us to the point that we won't even step outside of the place in which we start. Because if the enemy can stop us in this moment, at this position, in this place, the enemy doesn't have to worry about us next week or next year or next month or 20 years from now, or the impact that God is going to have in somebody else's life because of the anointing and the purpose that God has placed on us. And so the enemy instills this demon, this devil called fear, to subject us into being scared to even try. Not even just scared to try, but also scared to see. Scared to see that there is something above and beyond this moment, this day, this hour, this issue, this failure, this moment of illness, this moment of sickness. And here it is. All of us are prone to fear. All of us are prone to being scared sometimes. That is the reality of just being human. But I thank God that God is smart enough. God is intelligent enough. God is wise enough to realize that because there are certain realities that befall all of us as being human, God uses other folk. God will use other folk to encourage, to enrich, to speak a word, because sometimes, the truth be told, if it were not because of some other people that God appoints in our lives and around our lives, despite how intelligent, how full, how much character, how much integrity, how much opportunity we might have, if it were not for some other people breaking down certain walls in our minds and in our lives through encouragement, we would have never gotten to the places in which we sit right now. And so God uses somebody like Paul. This bent over preaching Paul. This Paul that has been bruised by his own journey, Paul. Paul that has been scorned, Paul that has been ridiculed, Paul that is a prisoner of his own intention to preach God's gospel. But Paul knows that, listen, if God brought me this far, if I can encourage somebody else and he is able to see and to hear the power of God in my testimony to him, then as far as God has brought me, he might get a little bit further. And so Paul reaches down into the recesses of his own issues, the recesses of his own well, the recesses of his own crucible, and he pulls out and pulls up something to be able to muster up enough strength and enough energy to talk to somebody else by the name of Timothy and say, I see something. I see something good. I see something strong. I see something powerful. But in the midst of your strength, I also see your weaknesses. And I need to tell you, you can't encourage anybody fully if you spend your time and your encouragement just telling them all about their beauty, but you never tell them about their ills. That's not real encouragement if you just tell them how wonderful they are, but you never identify some of the issues that will keep them from getting to the place in which God has purpose for their life. Because when you really love somebody, you just don't spend your time just trying to polish them up, because in order to polish them truly up, to be able to shine in the glory and the splendor that God desires for their life, you also have to call them to a place of reflection where they are able to see where they got some problems. Because some things, when they're not addressed at this level, they'll kill you by the time you get to the place that you think God is trying to elevate you to. And I need to tell you, it'll make a whole lot more sense for you to be able to maybe deal with some of this stuff when you're down here rather than to get up there and then everybody see how big of a fool you are. But Paul loves this man enough. He loves this young Bastion enough to be able to deal with some facts that are not just only about his good, but also about some issues that he might have that can limit him from reaching his potential. And he's saying, I don't want you to be fearful. I don't want you to be scared of these things. He acknowledges that Timothy has a great anointing and has great power, but he's also timid. And he realizes that if God has called this boy to preach the gospel to so-called people who are supposed to be Christians, he's going to need some strength and some power, and is not going to be able to just be walking around all day long talking about the Lord is good. Because the reality is that if he is building the church of the Lord Jesus Christ, he is not just going to meet adversaries and demons outside of the religious circle or outside of the church. He's going to meet adversaries and demons within the church. He's going to have to be able to talk strong. He's going to have to be able to hold his head up. He's going to have to be able to war with some things. He's not going to he's not going to be able to just caress everybody all the time. He's not going to have this opportunity to just be nice all the time. Paul says that, Timothy, you're a little bit too timid. Sometimes you talk just a little too calmly. Sometimes, Timothy, you might have to raise your voice. Timothy, sometimes you can't be so happy. Sometimes you might have to be a little bit more stern. He says God got something great for you, and he's put some strong stuff in you, but you're going to have to use it all, Timothy, because yes, this is preaching the gospel, but this is also a war and a battle. And you're going to have to be bold in the faith. He says to him, he's literally saying to him, don't allow anybody to make you feel just because you're bold and strong and sometimes your language is not as soft, that means that you're not a good Christian or a person of good faith. No, no, no. It takes all of that because he realizes that we got a charge to keep, we got a God to glorify, and in doing that, we got some devils to kill. He says that this is some strong and some scary stuff that you're going to have to face. And as you face strong and scary stuff, you're going to have to use some strong stuff against it to be able to deal with it, to war with it, and to not lose your mind. And so God put somebody in Timothy's life that was willing to tell him the truth in love and to encourage him, to aid him, and to push him into the future that God had for him. And so he tells Timothy, he says, now I need to tell you, what you have in you did not just start with you, but the stuff that you got, it came from your mama and your grandmama. They had it too. Don't you think that you got the skills that you got and the intellect that you got and the strength that you have and the fortitude that you have just because you so wonderful? No, there was some folk that came before you that had that same type of zeal, that had that same type of courage, that had that same type of motivation. That's why you the type of rock that you are, because your mama was a rock. If you want to see some strong, if you see some strong folk, look down into their tree, into their legacy. You probably gonna find some strong folk that came before them. There was some strong folk that came before them, and that stuff that they got is because of the DNA that is woven into the very fabric of their being. I'm not here just because God been so good to me. God has, but I'm here and there's some things that I'm able to face. There's some things I'm willing to see and to understand because of the grandmama, the granddaddy that I had. And he says, because I know where you came from. I know what you got in you. And it would be a disgrace if you didn't use all that good stuff that you have in you when I know all the good stuff that your mama and your grandmama had in them. He said, so for the sake of the kingdom, but also for the sake of your heritage, I don't want you can't be scared and timid, because if they could get through what they have gotten through, you surely should be able to get through what you gonna get through, gotta go through. He said, if Lois and Eunice had it, I know that you got it. So it would be a sin and a shame if you didn't use and muster up all that stuff that God has placed in you, with all the opportunities that God has afforded to you, that he didn't even afford those opportunities to Eunice and Lois. And so I want to encourage you to look inside yourself and to use everything that you have, because if you don't use it, you will believe the lies that are in front of you. And I want to tell somebody today, don't you believe the lies in front of you, because if your mama and granddaddy had enough sense not to believe them, don't you believe them either. Because I need to tell you, with everything that God has brought us through as a people, there's so much further to go. And I need to tell you that the enemy will place things in every generation to instill that fear, hoping that he might not get those before you. But if he can get you, he can keep us ultimately from the destiny that God has for us. But look, he says to Timothy, I want you to look inside yourself. Because he says everything that you need, you already have. You've been looking for something outside of yourself to help to enrich you, to help to strengthen you. But you need to start looking into the inventory of what you already possess, because you already got it. He says what you just need to do, rather than always trying to find something else to make you feel better about yourself, he says to stir up or to flame the resources, the gifts that God has already put in you. Come on, Doc, preach. And some of us have been looking around at stuff and other people, hoping that that can help to fortify us and to strengthen us to get to the places that we want to get, to do what we want to do. But we have yet to realize that God deals only with God's own providence. That means that everything that I need, everything that is necessary for my progression, for my productivity, for me to do what God done called me to do, God put it in me before I ever got here. Don't you remember what God says? Don't you remember what it says there in Jeremiah? Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew you. Before you came forth out of your mama's womb, I sanctified you. I had already ordained you and called you to be a prophet, to pull down and to tear down and to bring up. Remember, before your feet ever touched the sands of time, I already put in the womb what was necessary for you to be what I called you to be. That means that you don't need to look outside of yourself to find what you need. All you got to do is have some introspection and look inside of yourself for what God done already got for you. I'm looking for you to make me feel better about myself. I'm looking for you to make me feel loved. I'm looking for somebody else to make me feel like I need to be filled to do what I want to do. He says, no, Timothy. He says, you need to stoke this fire. Because I don't care how much wood you put into that fireplace. After a while, that wood, that fire, that flame is going to begin to burn out. And it's not just about putting wood into the fireplace, because too much will begin to smother. Sometimes you got to take something and just begin to stoke it. If you begin to stoke it, if you just begin to stoke it, just push it a little, just mix some stuff around, what's already in there will cause the flame to come right back up. I need to tell you, don't you count something out. Don't you count something down. Don't you place limits. Don't you be scared. Don't you allow yourself to die in the fear because you don't see much, because it doesn't look like much, because it doesn't look like it doesn't have much potential. Maybe what you just need to do is allow some air to get to it. Begin to stoke what you got. Some of us just need a little stoking. God ain't done with you. You just need that fire stoked. It ain't because God ain't got a purpose for your life. You just need that thing stoked. Somebody got to push you a little bit, prime you a little bit, pull you a little bit until some stuff begins to move around and what God got for you comes into full blaze. He says, I need you to stir up the gift. Make that fire burn. Some of us got great gifts. We done just allowed them to die out because of our fear, because we scared of something. He said, for this cause of what I have called you to, he says, you got some good stuff in you, and don't you be scared to use your good stuff. Because he says you got folk around you that will make you believe that you have nothing to offer, and because you don't look like them, you might not come from where they come from, you don't have what they have, you're scared to use what you got. But I need to tell you, the best of them, if they ever tell their story, the best of them, if they ever allow you to really look back into their past, the best of them, all of us started really on the same platform. All of us, if you look further enough, started with nothing. All of us got our share of brokenness. All of us got our share of misery. Maybe I can't find it with you. Maybe I can't find it with your mama. Maybe I can't find it with your grandmama. But if I look back further enough, maybe I can find it with your great-grandmama. Maybe you'll find out daddy ain't really daddy. Maybe you'll find out, like we say in the country, you was one of them field children crossed there somewhere. Look back further enough. Look back far enough, you'll find out that, guess what? The pristine look that everything has been placed upon is not as pristine as you have projected. But that's all right. That's all right, because you cannot allow that to be used to cause you to make you feel as you are less than, because God works and God utilizes the dust, the dirt, and the filth of our lives to perpetuate something that's grand and marvelous. And so he said, don't you be scared of that thing. Don't you allow that thing to cause you to fear to do what God has called you to do. He said, you just stir it up. And he said, this is the reason that you don't have to be scared to use the stuff that God has put in you, despite what might be said about you. Because even when you got great gifts, if your gifts don't align in some people's mind with your socioeconomic or your social status, they might make you feel like your gifts cannot be used. And so you'll find yourself hiding what God done put in you to satisfy what other people say that you only can be. But the devil is a liar. God, the devil is a liar. I need to tell you, the devil is a liar. If God keep on laying me down and getting me up, if God keep on bringing me up and bringing me out, if God keeps on turning and shifting and changing, if God keeps on stirring up stuff every day in me, the stuff that I got is worth too much. The stuff that I got, I've been through too much. The stuff that I got, God put in me for a greater purpose. The stuff that I got, that I ain't met no man, no woman, no Negro yet, that is big enough, that is strong enough, that is worth enough to keep me from doing what God has called me to do. And so he says, I need to tell you, this is why you don't have to be scared. Because it's something that heaven gave you. You hear me here? This is why you don't got to be scared, because I don't care what you think. What I got, you didn't give me. What I'm going to get, you can't give me. Where I'm going, you can't take me. So to start off, this is why I can utilize the resources that God has placed in me. This is why you can utilize what God has placed in you. This is why you don't have to be paralyzed by your fear. This is why you don't have to be scared, because heaven gave you something. Heaven gave you a spirit, a presence, an essence that is reflective of God. And that spirit, that essence, that being is not the spirit of fear. God didn't make you to be scared of nobody. God ain't made you to bow down to nobody. God ain't made you to sit there and tremble and to hold your mouth when you are not, keep silent. God didn't make you like that. God made you in the reflection of heaven. Every day I look at myself in the mirror, I see more and more of God. And you know what? Every time the world goes around, every time the sun comes up, every time the moon glows, it's just another indication that that's another moment where the devil has to stand and realize that he ain't got God yet. And the reason that he has not gotten God yet is because of the all-powerful nature of God as deity. But the power that is endowed in God is the power that God has also endowed in us. And so if I got God in me and you got God in you, how in the world it is a sin and a disgrace towards God when we allow ourselves to be paralyzed by fear and to be scared of utilizing everything that God done put in you and God has established for you. It is a sin and a shame against God. Every time you back up when you need to be going forward, you done slap God in the face. Come on, God. You done told heaven, why in the world? The Lord, I keep on getting you up day after day. I keep on bringing you out over and over again. I keep on raising you up when you ought to have been laid down. I keep on keeping your mind when you ought to have been in a straitjacket. Every time I have been there to bring you out over and over again. And look at you. Where are you? Veiled in your fear? Shut up in somebody's closet? Hidden behind some white face? What's wrong with you? Have I not been good to you? Have I not been a fence all around you? Have I not opened doors day after day? Have I not established you time and time again? I ain't gave you nothing that looks like that. Because whatever I have endowed upon you is reflective of me, and that is strength. That is power. That is that which can be fortified. That is that which cannot be knocked down. I have not given you a spirit of fear, but of power. I gave you a spirit of love because that is reflective. You not only don't you have to be scared, you can do what you do even to folk who don't like you and hate you. You can do it while you're hugging them. You can do it while you're smiling at them. You can do it while you're holding their hand, even while they're gritting their teeth at you. And he said, I need to tell you, when you allow yourself to break outside of fear and being scared, I need to tell you there's going to be some stuff that is going to try to tempt you to get outside of your character. But look what the text says. The text says, I ain't not only giving you power. I have not only given you love, I've given you sound mind. That also can be translated as self-control. You don't gotta be acting all crazy. You don't have to give them what they want, because when you give them what they want, that reverberates back to an essence of fear. He says, what I gave you, not only don't you have to be scared, he says you can do it in the power of my might. You can do it with love, and then you can act like you got some sense. He says, but not only are you not to be scared. Not only do you not have to be scared because of what heaven, what God, what you didn't give me, what God gave me, because of the instruments, the tools, the essentials that God gave me to navigate through this thing. Not only don't you have to be scared because of what heaven has given me with power, love, and self-control. He says, I need you to do something else. You can't be scared. You can't be scared of remembering everything that I done up until now and will do. Look what he says here. Look what he says here. He goes on in verse 9. He tells Timothy, he says, you don't have to fear because that's not what God gave you. He says, but I need to tell you this. There's something else that you don't have to be scared of. You don't have to be scared, ashamed of your testimony. He says the reason that you don't have to be scared is because of what I gave you, and that's even greater reason why you don't have to be ashamed, you don't have to be scared, you don't have to be fearful about the testimony about your Lord. Because when you see yourself, you ought to see yourself through the reflection of Jesus. That means that Jesus had every reason physically and his humanity to have been scared. He had every reason in his humanity, in his physicality, to be scared. Look at the circumstances by which he was born. Look at the economic structure by which he was born into. Look at the socio-cultural elements by which he was born. Every reason to be scared. Seemingly no friends, and the friends that he came to know, they seem to have left him and rejected him. The friends that should have been friends by virtue of his religious affiliation, they came to deny him and to reject him because of the pursuit that God had called him to do in the earth. Look, he had every reason to be scared. Scared of those that were religious but tried to deny the power that God had in him. He could have been scared of that. Scared because those that he had brought to him to carry out the agenda of his daddy on the earth, every time he looked, they were either sleeping on him or rejecting him or denying him or questioning him. Scared that somebody would sell him out for nothing much more than a few measly dollars. Jesus should have been scared of that. He should have been scared to go into a garden and have to suffer and have to drink from a bitter cup when he had not poured anything into it. He could have been scared of that. He could have been scared as Judas Iscariot comes there to betray him and to kiss him on the cheek, adorned there with God that he came to suffer, bleed, and die for. But yet they did not recognize that God had manifested himself in human flesh for the salvation of those in whom had rejected him. He could have been scared that an earth in which he created yet did not grasp him in the fullness of his being and in his glory. He could have been scared of that. He could have been scared of a casket on his back. He could have been scared of that. He could have been scared of hanging on Calvary. He could have been scared of that. He could have been scared of his daddy turning his face from him, having become the sin of the world. He could have been scared of that. He could have been scared of preaching there in hell. He could have been scared of that. He could have been scared of that power that got him out of the grave and woke him up on Sunday morning. He could have been scared of that. But when he got up with all power, he realized that the power of God that had been manifested in him had come from his daddy in glory. And that same power, that's the testimony that we don't have to be ashamed of, because if God saved Jesus, the same God of Jesus is the same God of me. He says you don't got to be scared of your testimony, because when you declare of your testimony, you declare the God that brought you to your testimony. He says, for I don't got to be scared, because this God has not given me that spirit of intimidation or fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. I don't have to be scared of my testimony, because my testimony testifies of the God that has brought me, that of the Lord Jesus Christ. And he says to Timothy, if you don't believe me, don't you even be scared and afraid to testify and to remember your friend Paul, who is as a prisoner suffering for Christ's sake and the sake of the gospel. Why? Because the God that has started a good thing in you will complete it, will bring it to a day of completion. I encourage you, my brothers and my sisters, today. The God of your salvation has caused us to acknowledge the skills, the instruments, the powers that are in us, calling us to something greater. And as God calls us to something greater, we remember that God has not given us a power that is fearful, but this power that God has given us is one that stands in the power of that God, which is love, which is self-control, that does not have to be ashamed of the testimony of this gospel that we preach. For God is calling us to something. What God is calling us to, don't be afraid to walk into it, for your best is yet to come. Would you stand today, the doors of the church?
Yes, we're gonna walk, we're gonna talk, we're gonna talk. Yes, we're gonna talk, we're gonna shout, we're gonna shout. Yes, we're gonna shout, we're gonna sing. we're gonna sing, yes, we're gonna sing, we're gonna walk, we're gonna talk, we're gonna shout, we're gonna sing, we're gonna sing, we're gonna walk.